before Wall Street existed, before Rome dreamed of an empire, before the idea of a global economy even had a name, there was a power that understood something the world hadn't fully articulated yet. You don't control an empire by force alone. You control it through the quiet, invisible architecture of money. And the Achaemenid Persians didn't just understand this truth, they built it from the ground up, turning finance into a weapon more durable than any sword, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. When most people imagine ancient Persia, they think of armies, palaces, or the sheer physical scale of an empire that stretched from the Iron Sea to the edge of India. But beneath that spectacle was the real machine, a financial system so sophisticated that modern governments still operate on the same blueprint: taxes, standardized currency, administrative districts, sovereign wealth reserves. We treat these as natural features of the modern world, but they weren't invented by the Greeks or by the Romans or even by the Chinese. The first fully integrated imperial financial system came from the Persians, and it began with a problem so vast that it would have broken almost any ruler. How do you unify dozens of cultures, economies, languages, and political traditions into one functioning system without losing control the moment you turn your back? To understand how Persia answered that question, we have to go back to the mid-6th century before Christ, when a man named Cyrus, later called the Great, and for good reason, conquered the Armies, defeated the Lydians, took Babylon, and stitched together the largest empire humanity had ever seen. Nearly 40% of the world's population lived under his rule. That scale had no precedent, and with it came the same problem that every empire faces when it gets too big, too fast: chaos. Each region Cyrus conquered had its own weights, measures, currencies, traditions, and tribute systems. Babylon collected taxes and grain. Lydia used coins. Egypt preferred agricultural levies. Some regions paid in precious metals, others in cattle or manufactured goods. It was a patchwork of incompatible systems, stable at a local level, but useless for imperial governance. Cyrus was an exceptional conqueror and a surprisingly tolerant ruler, but he wasn't a financial engineer. His system worked barely, but it wasn't scalable. And empires, like corporations, collapse when they grow faster than their accounting. That collapse nearly happened. By the time Cyrus's successors took the throne, the cracks were showing. Corruption among regional governors, tribute disappearing before it reached the capital, border provinces inventing their own rules, and no reliable way to coordinate resources across thousands of kilometers. If the empire was going to survive, it needed more than military strength. It needed structure, predictability, discipline, the kind of central financial intelligence that modern states take for granted. And then came the man who would supply it. Darius first. Darius didn't need to reinvent the empire, he needed to stabilize it. And his answer was something the Persians had never truly attempted before: a systematic, measurable, unified approach to money and power. In other words, imperial finance. His first move was radical. He reorganized the entire empire into administrative districts called satrapies. This wasn't new in principle. Earlier kings had regional governors, but Darius standardized the entire structure. Each satrapy was assigned precise fixed tax quotas based on its wealth, population, and productive capacity. No more arbitrary tribute. No more just send whatever you can. The obligations were known, predictable, and meticulously recorded. If you think your tax bill feels arbitrary today, imagine being a farmer in the 5th century before Christ, discovering that Persia had just invented the concept of fixed assessments. Congratulations, you're now living in the world's first large-scale bureaucratic tax system. But taxes were just the beginning. Darius realized something far more important. A diverse empire couldn't function with dozens of local currencies. Economies don't scale on confusion, they scale on trust. So, he introduced a new currency, one of the most influential in human history: the gold daric. The daric wasn't just a coin, it was a promise, a consistent, reliable, widely accepted unit of value backed by the empire's wealth and stability. It had a purity of about 95.8% gold, astonishingly high for the time, and a standard weight of 8.4 g. The silver siglo, its counterpart, circulated alongside it. Together, these coins became the empire's financial bloodstream. For the first time, merchants from Egypt to Anatolia to the Indus Valley could trade using the same medium of exchange. Soldiers could be paid in a currency accepted across the empire. Taxes could be collected in a uniform unit, and with standardization came something transformative: liquidity. The daric was so trusted that even the Greeks, who would later fight bitterly against Persia, adopted it in trade. In a sense, it was the world's first reserve currency, a forerunner to the pound, sterling, and the US dollar. When your enemies use your money, you're doing something right. But money only matters if it can move. And in an empire as large as Persia, that was no small challenge. Which is why Darius built something almost mythic in scale: the Royal Road, stretching roughly 2,700 kilometers with relay stations every 20-30 kilometers. It allowed couriers to travel from Susa to Sardis in just 7 to 9 days. That level of speed wouldn't be achieved again until the invention of rail. Messages, Taxes, bullion, administrative orders. Everything moved through this highway of control. The road wasn't a convenience, it was a statement. Infrastructure equals power. It always has. Meanwhile, behind the walls of precipice, the empire's treasuries filled with unimaginable stores of gold and silver. These weren't decorative hoards, they were strategic reserves, insurance against war, capital for public works, leverage over rebellious governors, liquidity for military campaigns. The Persians understood something that modern nations still debate. A strong treasury is a geopolitical weapon. Not because it buys luxuries, but because it buys time. And within this system, taxes, currency, infrastructure, reserves, something even more subtle was happening. Persia had discovered the financial incentive structure of empire. Satraps were rewarded for loyalty and punished for corruption. Local elites received loans or subsidies to keep regions stable. Temple economies were integrated into state finance. The empire didn't rule by crushing differences, it ruled by harmonizing them. A multicultural empire held together by spreadsheets instead of swords. All of it, the satrapies, the derrick, the royal road, the treasuries, created a system that was more than political. It was economic architecture at continental scale, and it worked. It worked so well, in fact, that when later empires copied Persia's model, they rarely improved on it. The Greeks mocked Persian luxury but adopted their financial logic. The Romans conquered Persia's western territories but borrowed the idea of provincial taxation and centralized treasuries. For centuries, the derrick remained a reference point for monetary stability. But Persia's financial system wasn't just copied, it was foreshadowing something deeper. The discovery that money is the real infrastructure of empire. And this is where the story turns from ancient history to an uncomfortable reflection of the present. Because when you strip away the royal titles, the stone reliefs, the gold coins, and the cavalry charges, you're left with a fundamental truth. The Achaemenids solved the same problems that modern nations struggle with today. Their tools were different, their technology was different, but the logic, the architecture is identical. Take the satrapy system. Persia divided its massive territory into administrative zones, each with its own governor, budget, and fixed tax structure. Today, we call these federal states, provinces, departments, cantons. The labels changed. The purpose didn't. You manage territory by managing revenue, and you manage revenue by knowing exactly who owes what to whom. Or look at the derrick, a stable, standardized, widely accepted unit of values circulating across multiple cultures and markets. What do we call that today? A reserve currency. The British pound played this role in the 19th century. The US dollar plays it now. Nations don't adopt your currency because they like you. They adopt it because they trust its stability more than their own. And while the Persians never framed it as soft power, that's exactly what it was. A gold coin that could move armies, shape alliances, or collapse local economies simply by existing. Even the royal road has its modern equivalent. Except now the highways are digital. Fiber optic cables, shipping lanes, satellite systems, undersea data pipelines. Whoever controls the movement of information and goods controls global power. China knows this. The United States knows this. Persia understood it 2,500 years ago. Then there's the treasury. Not a ceremonial vault, but a strategic reserve of wealth designed to absorb shocks, fund emergencies, and stabilize the political order. Today we call these sovereign wealth funds, foreign currency reserves, stabilization funds, or emergency liquidity mechanisms. Norway has one, Saudi Arabia has one, China has several. The United States, ironically, relies more on debt than reserves. A choice the Persians would have found reckless, because if the Achaemenids had a motto, it would have been simple. You prepare for crisis before the crisis arrives. When war broke out, when a satrap rebelled, when famine hit a region, the king didn't panic. He opened the treasury. Wealth wasn't for display. It was for survival. And that brings us to the real lesson, the one that makes the Persian Empire feel eerily modern. The Achaemenids didn't leave behind a philosophy. They didn't write treatises on economics or financial ethics or statecraft. Their wisdom is preserved through practice, not theory. The practice reveals something that every modern system keeps relearning the hard way. Power is not built on conquest. Power is built on financial clarity. Empires fall when they lose the ability to measure, coordinate, or secure their resources, not when they lose battles.